I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for streaming with us. Today on ABC News Live, President Biden is set to arrive in Saudi Arabia shortly on the latest leg of his high-stakes Middle East tour. He's set to meet face-to-face with the Saudi Crown Prince, who U.S. intelligence officials say ordered the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. What to expect from that meeting and how the president is trying to use this trip to help ease gas prices here at home. Also ahead, Brittney Griner returns to a Russian court after pleading guilty to drug charges. What we're learning about when she could take the stand in her own defense. Plus, new details on what Ukrainian officials are calling an open attack on civilians. Children are among the dead and dozens of people are still missing. We'll go to Ukraine for the latest on the fighting. And President Biden just landed in Saudi Arabia as he continues the second leg of his high-stakes tour of the Middle East. He's on that historic flight from Israel to Saudi Arabia. We're taking a live look at Air Force One again. Just landed there in Saudi Arabia. Our deputy political director, Avery Harper, joins me live now from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, for more on this. Avery, that flight from Tel Aviv is a historic one. Saudi Arabia actually opened airspace for the president to travel there, ending this ban on flights to and from Israel. How important is that?
Right, it is a signal of progress here in this region as the major focus of this trip is to create connections between Israel and other nations in the region. And it's not just for the president. There will be other flights that are able to go to and from Israel now that they have opened up the airspace here. And it's not just about airspace. There are hopes that there would be other kinds of cooperation as well as the region tackles issues like Iran's nuclear program, the fallout of Russia's war in Ukraine, things like food security as well. And so this is a sign of progress, but President Biden already tempering expectations on that. He told an Israeli news outlet that any sort of deeper connection is going to take some time.
Now, Avery, Biden has had to defend himself from a lot of criticism for this trip. He talked about making Saudi Arabia a pariah while he was campaigning. Now here he is visiting and meeting with the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. What can we expect from those talks today, and who else is Biden meeting with?
Right. So there's 9 other nations, and 9 other nations that will have leaders here in Jeddah this weekend as they try to tackle other issues. They're going to be talking about things like energy, things like food security. The nuclear program in Iran is also going to be a topic of discussion. Gas will also be a topic of discussion. The Biden administration is going to urge nations in this region to increase production in hopes that some of the prices of gas could go down. But experts say that Saudi Arabia specifically does not have a silver bullet that will allow for those prices to go down immediately. So we'll continue to see what happens there. He is going to meet with Saudi leaders, not just Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, but a group of Saudi leaders he will also meet with. And interestingly enough, during that press conference yesterday that he had with Israeli Prime Minister Lapid, he did not commit to mentioning Jamal Khashoggi. He says that his stance on human rights is clear and that he does not necessarily need to bring it up. He says that this meeting is about broader issues and a broader goal of creating connection. And so we'll be continuing to see what happens there.
Avery, how realistic is it that these talks could help secure a boost in oil production and then translate to easing gas prices here in the U.S.?
Well, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan spoke with reporters a little bit earlier. He says do not expect any big announcement as it relates to gas prices. Again, I think that the Biden administration is going to more broadly and more generally encourage the nations that are going to be represented here this weekend to increase oil production. Again, this is all about tackling the impact of Russia's war in Ukraine. We've seen gas prices go up. They're slowly falling down back at home, but not quite fast enough.
So, Avery, what else is on Biden's agenda for this tour?
So after meeting with Mahmoud Abbas earlier today, he is on a plane. He just landed here in Jeddah. He is going to be speaking with those leaders today. He's going to be having those bilateral meetings, again, to tackle issues that are going to be important to the region. He says that this is important to not only speaking about the impact of the Russian war in Ukraine, but this is also about competing with China and creating connections between Israel and other nations in the region.
And what about the next stops?
So the next stop is going to be here. He's here in Jeddah, and he's going to be speaking with leaders here about those issues. Again, it's about creating connections in order to make deeper connections here so he can tackle some of the issues that are confronting this region and use those connections to the best interests of the United States.
I want to bring in Mary Alice Parks, White House correspondent, to talk a little bit about the response to this, Mary Alice. Like I said, Biden has had to defend himself quite a bit going into this trip. Now here he is landing in Saudi Arabia and preparing for a meeting with the Crown Prince. So what has the response been from both his allies and his critics?
Yeah, Diane, he has faced criticism across the board, and he will likely continue to. He's had to defend this trip since it was first announced. Now, there's members of his own party and activists on the left that say that he just should never be in the same room meeting with the Crown Prince, who the United States government has pointed blame for the brutal killing of Jamal Khashoggi. They just say that this is, let alone, some of the involvement with the Saudi government in the war in Yemen and elsewhere in the world. You have activists on the left that just say there are too many human rights abuses. This is not the kind of relationship that the United States government should be engaged in. And then we've heard criticism from the right, especially around the conversation of oil and energy production. And we've heard Republican members especially say that the president should be focused much more on expanding domestic energy production. He's been accused of essentially going abroad to grovel for more oil into the global supply market from these Gulf states. The White House has pushed back against that very sternly. They say that they've been working very hard to boost domestic energy production, that's a completely separate and very complicated issue. But this is a controversial meeting, and you're right, Diane, he has been facing criticism across the board.
And Mary Alice, what about this topic of murdered journalist Jamal Khashoggi and whether or not President Biden is going to even mention that in this meeting?
Yeah, and we might not know. I mean, we're not expecting to see a lot of these meetings. I think that what's so interesting here is that the president has not been forthright about his intentions or his plans. He basically has tried to spin it by saying that the world knows his position on this, that he's been clear, that he wants to hold Saudi Arabia accountable. And, he's right that the Biden administration, I mean, he was instrumental in releasing that government report that showed U.S. intelligence findings that the Crown Prince had given the green light, at least was somehow accountable and should be held accountable for that brutal killing. But when asked point blank there just in the last few days, will he bring up his name in the conversations with the Crown Prince, he hedged. He wouldn't say so. And we just don't know what we'll see. Will we see a handshake? Will we see a fist pump? What is this going to look like? Some of those images could be lasting. They could be extremely controversial. A lot of unknowns.
And Mary Alice, what does that conversation look like? For critics who are coming after Biden and saying, you have to hold them accountable, you have to bring this up, you have to confront them about this. What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question, Diane. I'm not sure. We're talking about extremely sensitive and tricky international diplomacy. And that's part of the problem here is that President Biden he's trying to walk this incredibly tightrope, right? He both feels like it's important to hold these regimes accountable. It's important to bring up human rights abuses in his statements, in his public statements, in the work of the U.S. government. But he believes that he has to have some relationship, or that's what he says, at least going on these trips, that he believes he has to have some kind of relationship with this regime because of everything else going on in the world, is a way to counter Russian influence, a way to counter Chinese influence, a way to stabilize global energy markets. And so there's this sense that they have to find a way to have some talks, even if they are incredibly difficult.
And Mary Alice, the President Biden and the royal family, they are not the only leaders that are gathering in Saudi Arabia for this trip. So how significant is this meeting with the others who will be present as well?
Yeah, and that's been so much of the conversation and so much of what the White House has said when they've been facing this criticism about how he will meet with the Crown Prince. They're saying, okay, this is a part of a much larger summit. There are several leaders from several of these Gulf states, that we are attending a big international summit that happens to be held in Saudi Arabia. They've been trying to use that as a little bit of a political cover here, and also as part of the reason and rationale for going, saying that this isn't just about trying to start up some new talk, some new relationship with Saudi Arabia, but also to start to reinforce and have new relationships with these other leaders.
So what happens next, Mary Alice? What is Biden hoping to get out of this portion of the trip, and then where does he go from here?
Yeah, that's the other part of this that's really hard, is it's not clear, like Avery was saying, it is not clear that there's going to be some tangible takeaway. I mean, no one really thinks that there's some magic lever that these Gulf states can just instantly change the price of oil internationally. I mean, they can have a difference, they can make a difference, but it's probably not going to impact the price of gas back at home dramatically overnight. And so that's hard for this White House to put the president through such a controversial meeting without being able to come home and point to something very tangible for the American voter. That is tricky. But I think they're hoping that in the next few days and weeks ahead of the midterms, at least, they can say, we are trying, we are doing everything we can, we are out there talking to these leaders around the world, trying to stabilize energy markets, trying to respond to Russian aggression, and looking like, you know, an American president, American leader out there building some of these relationships.
And having wrapped up the part of this, the first leg of this tour in Israel, what's the feedback on the president's visit there?
You know, I think there was a sense that he had to do it, that he, of course, was going to do it, that it's so important for the United States to reinforce in every way, materially and symbolically, the key important relationship between the United States and Israel. But kind of what I was just saying, I think there's also a sense that there wasn't a tangible takeaway. There wasn't some big new flashy announcement. It clearly hasn't been at the forefront of this president's foreign policy agenda. He's been so much more focused on what's been happening in Europe, so much more focused on combating Russian aggression, supporting Ukraine with the war and Russia's invasion. When you talk to the president, he's so quick to talk about China, how he believes the whole world and democracies around the world need to unite to combat Chinese influence in the world. It just hasn't been his focus, and I think that a little bit of that was felt in the beginning of this trip.
And there we have, we're seeing President Biden now deplaning from Air Force One as he arrives there in Saudi Arabia. Greeted as soon as he gets to the bottom of the stairs. He's set to meet today with the Crown Prince as well as the King. Avery, what else is on Biden's agenda for this tour?
Right, he is going to meet with those Saudi leaders, but he's also going to meet with the other Gulf nations that are going to be here. He's going to meet with leaders tomorrow from Iraq, from Egypt, from other nations that are here this weekend. And it's all about, again, confronting the challenges that this region faces together, trying to forge connections between Israel, which has kind of been an outlier in this region for various reasons. And so we're going to see the president urge Israel to become more a part of the fold with other nations in this region, to confront things like the impact of the Russian war in Ukraine, like Iran's nuclear capabilities. These things are all in each of these nations' interests, and so it's going to overcome some of the challenges that have kept these nations from working together in the past. They're going to be talking about other things like infrastructure, things like clean energy, things like public health as well. These are all issues that we can expect for President Biden to speak about with some of these leaders, including the Saudi leaders, despite the backlash that he has gotten for meeting with Saudi leaders after being a candidate and calling for the kingdom to be treated as a global pariah. We see the president now saying that it is more important to come together in order to tackle some of these large issues.
And for those just joining, we just watched President Biden arriving in Saudi Arabia. The flight itself here, Avery, was historic. Why is it so significant?
Right. Well, before today, Israel was banned from Saudi Arabian airspace. And so what we're seeing today is the opening of that airspace, a signal of progress, again, as Biden tries to forge connections between Israel, a key ally for us in the region, and other nations. And so from now on, we will see be able to see flights from Israel and flights to Israel and from Israel be able to come and go from here in Saudi Arabia. But again, the president is tempering expectations. He says that significant deep ties between the two nations, which have not had diplomatic ties. Saudi Arabia did not recognize Israel. They did not want to recognize Israel until there was the establishment of a Palestinian state. Now we see the beginnings of what could be a deep connection in order to tackle some of these issues like national security due to the Iran's nuclear capabilities.
So, Mary Ellis, now with the president there in Saudi Arabia, what are you looking out for this leg of the tour?
Any details that we can get. I mean, any little handshake, any little fist pump, any little extra glance, or especially suggestions that he spent any significant time separate from the whole group with just members of the Saudi royal family will be very interesting. I mean, this is one of those trips where they are so tightly choreographed. The White House is extremely aware that any visual can set a headline, set a narrative. So everyone is going to be scrutinizing every look and every glance. And of course, the president is going to have to continue to face questions about whether he mentioned the brutal killing of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi to the Crown Prince, whether he mentioned other human rights abuses, how far the conversation went regarding the war in Yemen. I mean, he is going to have to explain and face questions about what exactly was discussed.
All right, Mary Ellis Parks in Washington, Avery Harper in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Thank you both. We'll be right back. Welcome back. WNBA star Brittney Griner appeared back in Russian court today. The defense has been given more time to prepare for Griner to take the stand after her doctor for her Russian basketball team, one of her teammates, and the director of the Russian League all testified on her behalf. Meanwhile, the Biden administration is facing mounting pressure to make a deal with Russia to get her home. White House correspondent Mary Ellis Parks joins me live again now for more on this. Mary Ellis, we have you wearing a few different hats today, so thank you for that. What's the latest on these negotiations over Brittney Griner?
Well, Dan, I have to tell you that was the first time I was seeing that whole video clip, and just to see her smile there, gosh, made a big difference to me watching it. Everyone here so nervous about how she's being treated, how she is handling all of this. But it was interesting, like you said, she did not testify in court today. Our reporters who were there and who were watching it told us, though, that her lawyers did present new evidence, specifically permissions from American doctors that she was given to use cannabis to reduce pain, and evidence that she suffers from chronic pain, which is why she had sought, prescription help like that. So they're clearly trying to paint this picture that American doctors had prescribed her some of this help. And that's a part of a larger strategy. They've been saying that she did not mean to commit a crime, that this was inadvertent. She did not mean to have that vape cartridge with her. And they're hoping for some leniency, given the fact that it was such a small, insignificant amount that was found, or that they claim even was found. Where things go from here, we don't know if we will eventually hear her testify. That still seems like likely, but now it's probably going to be a few weeks before that, Diane.
Now, the administration has faced some criticism for not doing enough to secure Griner's release. How complicated is this process, and what more could the administration be doing?
Yes, so complicated. I think it's hard to overstate that. I mean, this is some of the trickiest diplomacy that the United States deals with. I mean, you think about the fact that she was first detained a week before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and everything that the United States and this president has done to push back against Russia, to really try to alienate Russia since that invasion. I mean, U.S. and Russia relations have just completely shattered, completely cratered, and that has been the backdrop with all of her trial and all of her detainment unfolding. So this is incredibly difficult, incredibly challenging. I can't imagine a more challenging time for someone to be detained in Russia. And it's hard to know what else the United States could be doing, partly because they're not completely forthcoming about everything they are doing. We've heard from some members of her family and friends say that they do feel confident the United States is doing a lot, that they're getting some intel about stuff that the embassy staff and members of the National Security Council are doing to negotiate her release. But they don't talk about this openly, and that's intentional. They often say that these are the kinds of negotiations that are best done behind the scenes, without the view of the cameras, and so that makes this even more complicated.
Now, Mary Ellis, Brittney Griner is not the only American being detained in Russia right now. So how has her case affected negotiations for other Americans who are there?
Well, it's definitely brought a spotlight, definitely brought more attention. You're exactly right. There's also Paul Whelan, who is wrongfully detained, who the United States has determined is also wrongfully detained. He's a former U.S. Marine and businessman who was first detained back in 2018, basically accused of espionage. He says the whole thing is fabricated, that he was set up, but his case has been front and center, and her case, and especially, sort of her celebrity, how much her fans love her, has shined the light on both her case as well as Paul's.
All right, Mary Alice Parks, we appreciate it as always. Thank you. Coming up, at least 23 people are dead and dozens injured after a Russian missile strike in central Ukraine. Why officials there are calling it an open attack on civilians when we come back. Welcome back. At least 23 people, including 3 children, are dead and more than 100 are injured after a Russian missile strike on a city in central Ukraine. Officials there are calling it an open attack on civilians, and analysts say it's part of a systematic campaign of attacks on residential areas. Foreign correspondent Tom Sufi-Burridge has the latest from Ukraine.
The aftermath of a Russian strike on a university in Mykolaiv in video posted by a local official. Putin's troops pounding this southern city not far from the fighting almost every day. And this, the terrifying moment, a missile hits Vinnytsia in central Ukraine, blowing out shop windows in surveillance video posted by a Ukrainian official. Dozens of people still missing, more than 30 seriously injured. So far, 23 confirmed dead. 3 of the victims' children, including 4-year-old Lisa, seen here in video thought to be from just moments before the explosion. This, her stroller at the scene, her mum in intensive care. Nearby cyclists knocked to the ground, pedestrians and their pets running for their lives in more surveillance video posted online. And seconds after the blast, a thick cloud of smoke casting this massive shadow. The scale of this attack clear from afar in videos circulating online.
My husband's office was on 4th floor.
On the 4th floor, your husband had an office?
Her husband survived, but Ludmila full of anger and despair.
Why they bombed us? Why?
Well, it's hard to imagine this area packed full of people, including families and children. But look down here at this crater, you can see where one of the missiles landed. And look up at that building behind us. It ripped through there, the explosion. That was a medical clinic. We're getting word this morning from Ukraine's Prosecutor General that a team in the US is now ready to come over here to Ukraine to help investigate potential war crimes. Diane?
All right, Tom Sufi-Burridge, thank you. And thank you for joining us. I'm Diane Macedo. Stay with us as ABC News Live continues with more news, context, and analysis right after this.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.